Every year, archaeology is full of unexpected revelations. Sometimes it's a small find that is a crucial piece to a larger puzzle. Other times, it's something much bigger, a tomb, even a whole city turning up. And in 2025, it was no different. Again and again, archaeologists ran into things that added a whole new section to the picture of the past that we had. In more than a few cases, the discoveries forced us to go back and rethink what we thought we understood. In this video, I'm counting down what I think were the 20 greatest archaeological discoveries of 2025. As usual, I'm focusing on ancient times. Let's get into it. Number 20, the Harappan world reaches the margins. For a long time, the Harappan civilization, also popularly known as the Indus Valley Civilization in what is now Pakistan and India, was explained through its great river cities. Places anchored to floodplains, where water and agriculture seemed to define what was possible. That model worked well until archaeologists started finding cities that didn't fit it at all. In Rajasthan, near the edge of the Thar Desert, archaeologists excavating at Ratadiya Rideri this past year uncovered clear evidence of a mature Harappan settlement, roughly 2600 to 1900 BCE. Beneath the sand were occupation layers, pottery in classic Indus styles, tools, and kiln remains. The Harappan world was not confined to river valleys or a handful of monumental cities. It spread into deserts and marginal zones. These discoveries change how we understand one of the world's earliest civilizations. It was not fragile or narrowly constrained. It was flexible, resilient, and far more geographically ambitious than we knew. Number 19, Christians and Zoroastrians side by side in late antique Iraq. On the Sharizor Plain of northern Iraq, archaeologists from the Goethe University Frankfurt returned in late summer 2025 to a site called Gird-i-Kazau. The goal was to better understand a structure in the city that had already produced hints it might be Christian. What emerged from the ground this year showed that to be true, reshaping how we think about religious life under the Sassanid Empire. Excavations focused on two areas. In Area A, the team opened trenches around a group of stone pillars. As they dug, they uncovered brick walls and rammed earth floors, later rebuilt with stone and reused bricks. More pillars appeared, enough to reconstruct a large three-aisled building with a central nave running northwest to southeast. Pottery decorated with cross motifs helped identify the structure as a Christian church, likely built around 500 CE. Just nearby, the excavators uncovered something equally important, the remains of a Sassanid period fortification dating to the same centuries. The church and the fort were contemporary, standing side by side in the same settlement. That matters because the Sassanid Empire was officially Zoroastrian. The fort represents state authority and Zoroastrian power, while the church shows a Christian community practicing its faith openly in the same place at the same time. Christians and Zoroastrians lived as neighbors here. Now that's interesting because the Sassanid Empire is often remembered in ancient Roman sources for periods of tension and sometimes outright persecution directed at Christian communities, especially when relations with the Roman Empire were strained. But 2025 excavations revealed a settlement where religious communities were not neatly segregated or erased by conquest. Instead, we got walls, floors, and pillars showing continuity, proximity, and coexistence. It's a rare case where archaeology lets us see everyday religious pluralism. Number 18, Hittite archives at Kayalıpınar. In central Turkey, archaeologists have been working for years at Kayalıpınar, a low, open site on a broad plain. Ancient Hittite texts mention a major city here called Şamuha, but its importance has been difficult to see on the ground. That began to change recently. As teams cleared floors and workspaces inside a set of buildings, small clay objects started turning up exactly where they had been left. They were cuneiform tablets, not scattered around, not reused. They were lying in place on floors and along walls. By the end of the season, the count reached 56 tablets, along with 22 seal impressions. The tablets are small, some only a few centimeters across, and many deal with bird divination, a ritual practice central to Hittite religion. Others record official matters, naming priests, administrators, and members of the royal household. The seal impressions belonged to people at every level of authority, from kings and princes to officials whose job it was to authenticate documents. These texts were found together inside working rooms, giving them context. You can see where records were written, sealed, consulted, and stored. We now know that Shamucha was more than a provincial town. The tablets show it as a place where ritual, administration, and royal authority came together. Names, decisions, and practices that once existed only in copied texts are now anchored to a real location. These tablets capture moments of thought and action from more than 3,000 years ago, preserved where they were used, and they add new detail to how one of the ancient Near East's great powers actually functioned day to day. Number 17, an Etruscan healing sanctuary. In southern Tuscany, there's a small hill town called San Casciano del Bagni. People have come here for warm, mineral-rich water for thousands of years. Recent work focused on an area known as the Bagno Grande, where hot water still rises from the ground. Long before modern spas, these springs were treated as sacred, and excavations had already shown this was an important sanctuary used by both Etruscans and Romans. In 2025, archaeologists expanded their work to better understand how the site developed in its earliest phases. As they dug deeper around the springs, they began to document parts of a large enclosure wall and associated structures that pushed the sanctuary's origins back to at least the late 5th century BCE. Among the offerings deposited around the springs were numerous anatomical votives made of terracotta. Hands, feet, limbs, and organs appeared one after another, each left by someone seeking healing. A detailed terracotta model showing internal organs. The quantity and quality of these offerings suggest this was a sanctuary that was carefully organized, with ritual spaces arranged around the water, and offerings placed in deliberate ways. San Casciano de Bagni matters because it opens a window onto how healing, religion, and knowledge came together in Etruscan society. This was a place where people brought their bodies, their hopes, and their understanding of health to sacred water that was believed to cure. What has emerged from the ground is evidence of a long-lived healing tradition that shaped how people understood illness and recovery in ancient Italy. Early walls at Jinan. Yes, in eastern China, the city of Jinan sits on ground that has been occupied for thousands of years. Today, it's a modern provincial capital. In antiquity, it lay at the heart of powerful states and much older societies whose names we don't even know. In 2025, there were 2 discoveries in and around the site. The first major find involved new excavation along the Qi Great Wall on the hills and ridgelines outside the city. For decades, archaeologists believed the Qi Wall was mainly a product of the late Warring States period, built around the 4th or 3rd century BCE, when warfare between states had reached an intense, almost constant level. The assumption was that larger defensive walls appeared relatively late as military pressure increased. The 2025 excavations changed that picture. By studying construction layers and pottery found alongside the wall near Jinan, archaeologists showed that parts of the Qi Wall were already being built in the spring and autumn period around the 7th century BCE, roughly 300 years earlier than previously thought. That means Qi began fortifying its borders at a time when regional states were only starting to define fixed territories. In the oldest part of the core Jinan settlement, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a much older rammed earth city wall dating to the Longshan culture around 2600 to 1900 BCE. This wall belonged to a prehistoric settlement that existed long before writing, bronze metallurgy, or formal states. We knew about a settlement being there at the time, but not about the defenses. The Longshan Wall was thick, carefully constructed, and it shows that a large community was already organizing labor, defining urban space, and protecting territory more than 4,000 years ago. Number 15, a major Celtic settlement in Czechia. In eastern Bohemia, archaeologists were doing routine rescue work ahead of a new stretch of highway. The planned route of the D35 motorway passed near Hradec Králové, and before construction could begin, the ground had to be checked. No one expected what followed. As the first trenches went in, features began to stack up quickly. House remains, working areas, pits filled with material. The excavation kept expanding, and it became clear the team was standing inside a settlement far larger than anyone had predicted. By the end of the work, the site covered dozens of hectares, making it one of the largest Celtic settlements ever identified in this part of Europe. Hundreds of gold and silver coins came out of the ground, along with jewelry, glass beads, fine ceramics, and large quantities of amber. Some of the coins appear to have been minted locally, pointing to real economic power in the region. Evidence of metalworking, glass production, and other crafts showed that this was a busy, organized community. The settlement dates to the Latin period of the Iron Age, around the last few centuries before the Christian era. The discovery shows that Celtic societies in Central Europe supported large populations, specialized crafts, and long-distance trade networks. And written sources tell us almost nothing about daily life in Celtic Europe at that time. Sites like this fill that silence. Number 14, a Bronze Age city on the Kazakh steppe. In northeastern Kazakhstan, above the wide bends of the Irtysh River, there's a terrain cut by shallow valleys and ravines. For years, archaeologists assumed this part of the steppe had been used mainly by mobile herding groups who moved with their animals and left little behind. The assumption started to change when researchers returned to a site known locally as Semiyarka, sometimes called the City of Seven Ravines. The site had been noted decades ago, but only recently was it studied in detail using modern survey and excavation. Excavation revealed a settlement covering roughly 140 hectares laid out with rows of rectangular buildings, many divided into multiple rooms. Near the center stood a much larger structure, possibly a communal or administrative building. But what truly set Semiyarka apart was what lay in one corner of the site. Archaeologists uncovered slag, crucibles, ore fragments, and finished metal objects, clear evidence of large-scale bronze production. This was industrial activity. Tin bronze was being produced here in quantity around 1600 BCE. Semiyarka forces a rethink of the Bronze Age steppe. It shows that settled, organized communities with complex production systems existed alongside mobile herders. In a region long thought to leave little trace, an entire city devoted in part to metallurgy had been hiding. Number 13, a 3,000-year-old urban triangle in Guatemala. In northern Guatemala, deep in the forest of the Petén, archaeologists have spent years scanning the jungle for signs of early Maya culture. Much of what we know about the Maya comes from later, famous cities. The earlier chapters are harder to see, buried beneath thick vegetation. Near the long-known site of Huachachtún, archaeologists used LiDAR to look beneath dense forest cover. What appeared in the data were large platforms, pyramidal forms, and planned spaces spread across several nearby locations. The layout suggested something unexpected, an early urban landscape dating to the Middle Preclassic period, around 800 to 500 BCE. In 2025, excavation and on-site investigation confirmed that the LiDAR signals corresponded to substantial architecture. At a site now called Los Abuelos, archaeologists uncovered stone monuments, including two carved human-like figures, an ancestral couple, that gave the site its modern name. Nearby, at Petnal, they documented a massive pyramid about 33 meters, 108 feet tall, remarkable not only for its size, but for surviving painted murals from this early period. At Cambrayal, excavation revealed a palace complex connected to a carefully engineered canal system. Together, these sites form what archaeologists described as an interconnected urban triangle spaced only a few kilometers apart. This discovery matters because it shows that by the Middle Preclassic, communities in the Petén were already building large monuments, organizing landscapes, and experimenting with urban life. This is a period when the Maya were traditionally thought to live in smaller, less centralized communities. The scale and layout here tells a different story. Number 12, wooden houses in Zhejiang. In eastern China, in the city of Shaoxing, a handful of archaeologists found something unexpected while surveying land slated for development. As is customary, they checked for buried artifacts before construction began, but as they began digging, the soil started to give up something unusual. What emerged first were dark patches in the earth, remnants of ancient river channels and wells. That immediately told them this wasn't just a random scatter of pottery sherds. As the team expanded the trenches, they began to uncover large terraced wooden foundations laid out across a wide area. Radiocarbon dating showed these remains go back to around 400 BCE during the early Warring States period. The site known as Baicaoyuan isn't notable for a palace or temple. Instead, the wooden structures are stilted, terraced houses built with posts, interwoven wooden walls, thatched roofs, and reed and bamboo coverings, an architecture adapted to the coastal environment. One foundation stretches roughly 35 meters long, and in total the exposed area covers about 1,300 square meters. This is an exceptionally rare find from the Yue state, a coastal polity that once dominated this part of southeastern China. Wood, you know, almost never survives in ancient sites because it decays so easily. In this case, however, the wet, oxygen-poor soil around ancient river channels preserved not just floors and posts, but traces of the original roof materials and binding techniques. This discovery helps us imagine ancient life much better than just the usual artifacts that we find. Number 11, an undisturbed Etruscan tomb at San Giuliano. In the rolling hills of northern Lazio, archaeologists have been working for years among the rock-cut tombs of San Giuliano, about 70 kilometers northwest of Rome. All the burial chambers found up to that point were opened long ago, sometimes in antiquity, sometimes by early modern looters. Intact tombs are so rare that most teams don't expect to find one. But during a recent Baylor University-led excavation, researchers noticed a sealed entrance cut into the bedrock. The blocking stones were still in place. There was no sign of disturbance. When the team carefully removed the fill and opened the chamber, they realized they were looking at a tomb that had not been entered since it was closed more than 2,600 years ago. Inside, 4 people were laid out on carved stone beds, what on sight appeared to be 2 male-female couples, but scientific analysis of the bodies is forthcoming. There were more than 100 grave goods. Everything was still where it had been left. Ceramic vessels, iron weapons, bronze ornaments, silver hair spools. The burial dates to the late 7th or early 6th century BCE, a formative period in Etruscan history. Because the tomb was untouched, archaeologists could document the full burial ritual as it was practiced, from body placement to the arrangement of the offerings. The San Giuliano discovery preserves a moment frozen in time, allowing us to see how the Etruscans honored their dead before centuries of disturbance blurred the picture. Number 10, a Moche palace at Pañamarca, Peru. On Peru's north-central coast, the Napeña Valley is a dry landscape where adobe ruins blend easily into the hills. Archaeologists have worked at Pañamarca for years, drawn by fragments of vivid murals that hinted at something important nearby. Now, archaeologists have uncovered a large elite palace complex dating to around 600 to 700 CE, during the height of the Moche civilization. The palace includes multiple rooms arranged around courtyards, thick adobe walls, benches, platforms, and restricted access spaces. The layout and scale indicate this was not a domestic compound, but a residence or administrative center tied to high-ranking Moche elites. It became clear the murals belonged to this large palace. They show elaborately dressed women in formal scenes, seated, standing, and participating in ritual processions. Their scale and placement within the building suggest that women played central roles in Moche power structures. Yes, in a quiet valley, a palace long hidden by dirt is reshaping how we understand Moche power. Number 9, Lydian Palace at Sardis. In western Turkey, at the site of Sardis, archaeologists have been working. Sardis is best known as the capital of the Lydian kingdom, a power that rose in the early 1st millennium BCE and later entered Greek memory as a land of wealthy kings and early coinage. For a long time, that history was clearer in text than in the archaeology. Recent excavation changed that balance. While working beneath later Persian and Roman layers, archaeologists began to expose heavy stone foundations, and soon it became clear they were uncovering a large palace complex dating to around 800 to 700 BCE, early in the Lydian state's development. Large interior spaces suggest halls meant for administration, ceremony, or royal residence. Its position within Sardis points to a center of authority built when Lydia was consolidating power over Western Anatolia. This discovery matters because early Lydian palaces are almost entirely missing from the archaeological record. Greek authors describe Lydian kings and courts, but physical evidence has been scarce. The Palace of Sardis gives those accounts a real architectural setting. Number 8, an early Coptic city in the desert. In Egypt's western desert, near the Bahariya oasis, archaeologists have been carrying out work to understand how people lived beyond the Nile corridor in late antiquity. As excavation commenced, mud brick walls appeared beneath the sand. Those walls formed houses laid out along recognizable streets. Continued digging revealed storage rooms, workshops, and several church buildings with basilica-style plans. Don't think this was a hermitage or a small monastic outpost. This was a planned urban settlement dating to the early Coptic period, roughly between the 4th and 7th centuries CE. The city had clearly been occupied for generations. The buildings show repairs and rebuilding, suggesting long-term residence rather than seasonal use. Its churches point to an organized Christian community with established religious life, functioning far from the administrative centers of the Nile Valley. This discovery shows that Christian communities were not confined to river towns and monasteries near the Nile. They built real cities in the desert, managing water and food storage and daily life in a harsh environment. Christian history in Egypt was more geographically ambitious than we once imagined. Number 7, a Thracian palace at Vratsa. In northwestern Bulgaria, the modern city of Vratsa sits at the edge of a region that was once part of ancient Thrace. Classical authors wrote about Thracian kings, their wealth and their power, but archaeology has often struggled to show where those rulers actually lived. Thrace is famous for its tombs. Palaces are another matter. This discovery began during construction work in the city center, when rescue archaeologists were called in to examine what lay beneath the modern streets. As the upper layers were removed, large stone walls started to appear. This was no ordinary building. Continued excavation revealed the foundations of a substantial palace complex built with massive blocks and designed on a scale meant to impress, dating to the 4th century BCE, a period when Thracian dynasties were actively negotiating power with Macedon and the Greek world. This find helps turn Thracian history from something known mostly through outsiders' descriptions into something rooted in material evidence. At Vratsa, a ruling dynasty has finally left behind not just its dead, but its home. Number 6, the tomb of Caracol's first ruler. Deep in the forest of western Belize, archaeologists have been excavating at Caracol for decades. The city is massive, spread across hills and ridges, and it played a central role in classic Maya politics. Yet one question had lingered for a long time. Who founded Caracol as a royal city, and where was that person interred? The answer came from work focused not on a towering pyramid, but on a royal palace compound. Archaeologists were carefully peeling back construction phases beneath the palace floor, trying to understand how the earliest royal buildings were laid out. As they dug below later floors, they encountered a sealed burial chamber. The burial is associated with Tuk-ab-Chak, whose accession in 331 CE marks the founding of Caracol's dynasty. The burial contained ceramic vessels, jade ornaments, and shell objects arranged in a formal pattern. Inscriptions and associated material identified the king, the first known ruler of Caracol. The burial provided the anchor point, physically tying a named historical figure to the early palace and the moment when Caracol's dynasty began. This is what makes this discovery so important. Maya inscriptions often record founding events centuries after the fact, right? Here, a ruler named in text is matched to an actual burial beneath the palace that he helped establish. The tomb of Tuk-ab-Chak turns Caracol's early history from a reconstructed timeline into a grounded archaeological reality. It gives us a rare, precise moment when a Maya dynasty takes shape. Number 5, an early image of Jesus at Iznik. The modern town of Iznik sits inside massive ancient walls, and beneath its streets lies the city once known as Nicaea. Nicaea is famous for the council held there in 325 CE, but its Christian history goes back well before that moment, to a time when Christianity was still practiced quietly and without government support. Archaeologists were working in the historic center of Iznik as part of routine urban excavation, removing later floors and walls to document earlier phases of the city. As one section of plaster was cleaned, faint traces of pigment began to show through. Careful work revealed a wall painting still in place, and the image showed Jesus as the Good Shepherd, carrying a lamb across his shoulders. The fresco dates to the late 3rd or early 4th century CE, a period before large public churches when Christian communities met in modest buildings. What makes the discovery remarkable is how early it is. Figurative images of Jesus from this period are rare, and wall paintings are rarer still. The Good Shepherd was a powerful image for early Christians, drawing on familiar pastoral themes to express care, protection, and salvation without overtly declaring identity in a hostile world. This fresco matters because it adds a human visual dimension to early Christian life in Nicaea. Long before councils and creeds, people here were already shaping how Jesus was perceived and understood. Number 4, a 3,500-year-old city in the Peruvian Andes. High in the northern Peruvian Andes, above the coastal valleys of Barranca, archaeologists have been working in an area that once connected very different worlds. This is where the site of Peñico came to light. For years, Peñico was known locally as a series of low mounds and terraces. It looked ancient, but no one knew how extensive it really was. Researchers from the Caracol Archaeological Zone began systematic excavation after surveys suggested more complex structures beneath the surface. What emerged was a planned city dating to around 1800 to 1500 BCE. Archaeologists documented ceremonial buildings, residential zones, and distinctive sunken circular plazas, similar to those seen at much earlier sites along the coast. The architecture shows careful planning and long-term investment. This was a regional center. It dates to the period just after the decline of the Norte Chico or Corral civilization, the earliest known complex society in the Americas. For a long time, scholars debated whether urban life in this region collapsed at that moment or simply changed form. Peñico answers that question. The city shows that people adapted, reorganized, and continued building complex societies rather than abandoning them. Peñico carried ancient traditions forward into a new phase of Andean history. Number 3, the tomb of an Egyptian prince at Saqqara. South of modern Cairo, the vast necropolis of Saqqara has been explored for generations. It served the ancient capital of Memphis for centuries, and layer after layer of burials from different periods still lie beneath the sand. Whole sections remain only lightly investigated. In 2025, an Egyptian archaeological mission began clearing a previously unexplored area of the site. A decorated tomb was found. The inscriptions named its owner, Prince Userefre. Userefre was a son of King Usarkov, the founder of Egypt's 5th dynasty, that's Old Kingdom, ruling in the mid-25th century BCE. Until this discovery, he was known only from scattered textual references. His burial place had never been identified. The newly uncovered tomb included false doors bearing his name and titles, along with relief scenes showing offerings and ritual activity expected for a member of the royal household. This tomb, built for a prince, reflects the growing importance of royal family members during the 5th dynasty, when princes often held priestly and administrative roles rather than succeeding to the throne. The discovery adds a real person to Egypt's early dynastic history and helps clarify how royal sons were commemorated and how power and privilege were distributed beyond the king himself. Number 2, a royal tomb at Gordion. In central Anatolia, the ancient city of Gordion has long been tied to one of antiquity's most famous names. King Midas looms large in Greek myth, but he also appears in Assyrian records as a real ruler of Phrygia in the late 8th century BCE. For some time now, archaeologists have hoped to pin that historical person to physical remains. The search took a major step forward when archaeologists identified a previously unexcavated burial mound on the outskirts of the city. Gordion is surrounded by tumuli, many explored decades ago under far less controlled conditions, but this one had been left untouched. Excavation began carefully, slicing through layers of packed earth until a wooden burial chamber came into view. Inside was a richly furnished tomb. Bronze cauldrons and serving vessels were arranged as if for a feast. Iron tools and organic remains, including traces of textiles, had survived thanks to the sealed environment. The layout clearly reflects a funerary banquet, a practice closely associated with elite Phrygian burials. Dating the wood beams through dendrochronology placed the tomb in the late 8th century BCE, the same dynastic horizon as Midas himself. No inscription names the individual, so archaeologists are cautious to make a declaration, but everything about it points to someone from his ruling family or immediate circle. At the very least, this tomb anchors the world of Midas firmly in archaeology, showing how Phrygian elites lived, feasted, and were laid to rest at the height of their power. And finally, number 1, the tomb of Pharaoh Thutmose II. On the west bank of Luxor, in the cliffs near Deir el-Bahari, archaeologists have spent decades working among temples and tombs tied to the dawn of the New Kingdom. This is the landscape of Hatshepsut, whose mortuary temple dominates the scene. Yet for all the attention given to her reign, one basic question lingered nearby. Where was the original tomb of her husband, Thutmose II? That question was answered by careful excavation and reassessment of poorly understood tomb remains in the area. Archaeologists were clearing debris and studying architectural fragments associated with early 18th dynasty activity when they began to find pieces of decorated plaster and stone bearing a royal name. Those fragments pointed consistently to Thutmose II. We're talking about the tomb of a pharaoh. You think all the tombs of the pharaohs have been discovered? No way. The tomb itself had suffered badly in antiquity. Evidence of flooding showed that water had poured through the chambers not long after burial, likely damaging the contents and forcing priests to move the king's body elsewhere. That explains why Thutmose II's mummy was found long ago in a later cache, divorced from its original resting place. What makes this discovery so important is that it finally anchors Thutmose II in the landscape. His reign sits at a pivotal moment, just after Egypt reunified and just before the great imperial expansion under his son Thutmose III. Until now, his burial place was a blank spot in the map of royal tombs. This find doesn't dazzle you with gold or intact chambers. They moved everything out when they put him in a new spot. But by locating his original tomb, archaeologists have filled a missing chapter in the early New Kingdom story, showing how royal burial traditions were still taking shape before the Valley of the Kings became the standard. So there you have it, my top 20 picks for the best archaeological discoveries of the year. Did I miss one that you think should have been on here? Let me know in the comments down below. You might like my little e-booklet, Why Ancient History Matters. It's designed to persuade people that the subject is important, even in the modern world. You might also wish to use it to help spread the word, so feel free to share it with someone you know. It's free for anyone who wants it. I've left a link in the description box below the video for you to grab a copy. Catch you later.